Yeah.
my tripod.
Dan, your video is like, it looked like you're covered in
Horrible.
saran wrap, brother.
I
Yeah.
am.
What happened?
Actually, you look like it's about 2003 on Google Video.
Oh man.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is our first YouTube live broadcast. Welcome everybody to the quote the Hraefn, is what we're calling it. I see we got Kaylee in the chat. What's happening, Kaylee, Madam Burkana? How are you? Let's maybe go around and just start vibing out. Dan, how are you? You just got off work, hey bud?
Yeah, man. Long day. That's how it
Long
goes.
day.
So
yeah.
Oh, can you guys hear me okay?
Raven's been having a long day too.
Oh yeah, you sound good.
Okay.
Slight reverb too. I like reverb. What about your painting behind you? Is that a new piece of work you're working on?
No, that's the one that I showed you before. That's the master grid.
Oh whoa!
The runic master grid. It's advanced. Go ahead.
Why don't you go into a little bit about that painting, how you painted it, what it's about, and that'll get some conversation flowing.
So I don't know how many people are joining in that were present for my Norse runes conversation, but I talked a lot about the master grid, and that in the discussion that I have started with myself, essentially, about the real origins of the runes and the beginnings of the runes, and where they're from and what they're really about. Over many years of research, I finally came to the conclusion that there was a singular master grid to which every rune could be applied. And what this is, and I'm not sure how well they can see it, but this is that master grid. And it has in it the possibility, the ability to create every one of the 24 Elder Futhark runes. And it also breaks the way that the conclusions that I've come to about what the actual structure of the rune strand is. So it is that it's broken into three sets of 8 runes, and that they're in concentric circles. And so all of that is represented in it. And this is really the beginning, because what I've decided to do is this is the beginning of my book about the runes. This is the first page, essentially. And going forward, I'll break the 3 rings down. So there'll be new paintings with the 3 rings separated from each other with the runes that are associated with them. And then I'll go into the entire string, and there'll be a painting for each rune showing its original protoform, the original, I'll say, popular form, the common form that everybody knows. And then I'll apply that to the grid, and then above it, you will see what the proto rune, in my opinion, probably looked like. So this is the beginning of
super fascinating.
The rune book, basically.
Wow. So just real quick, because what you're talking about is incredibly beautiful, original, and we want everybody to hear what you're saying. This sounds like it's a little muddy of the audio, like a little feedback is coming in.
Mine is muddy?
Okay. Yeah.
I wonder why that's happening. Excuse me a moment, and let me just try a different headset. I'll be right back.
Hey, well, Dan, I got something fun to tell you, bud. We were doing an episode of Esoteric America earlier, and was looking up. We were talking about this place in Georgia called Stone Mountain. Stone Mountain is this mountain of stone, basically, and it goes all the way down 8 miles into. It's a mountain, and guess what? It's made of stone, but it's all complete quartz, right? So it's a huge, massive 8-mile long piece of quartz. super fascinating. It's possibly one of the biggest solid pieces of quartz. Yeah, it goes 8 miles into the ground into the bedrock. And there was a certain time that the Stone Mountain was being quarried to and extracted. The mineral there was being shipped all over the world, and they used some to build the Panama Canal, and they used some to put the steps in Washington, D.C. Now, the famous thing about this place is that there's these Confederate, the guy who did Mount Rushmore put these Confederate statues basically in the side of Stone Mountain, because the Venable brothers were the brothers that owned the quarry on Stone Mountain. And they one of the brothers, William Venable, was the stronghold leader of the Ku Klux Klan. And so I just went on a little bit of a deep dive looking up the Venable brothers and their connections to, because when it said the Panama Canal, I was like, oh shit, like that's Henry Flagler. Henry Flagler funded the Panama Canal. So I was like, okay, what's their connection to Rockefeller? I was like, are they, so are they using the trains? Like, what's their connection? Then I looked it up, and Venable is a huge family name that apparently goes all the way back to the late 18th century. And now there's a Venable law group that's ran out of Washington, D.C. And so, like I said, the William Venable was like the head of the Ku Klux Klan in Georgia, and they were said to meet at the Stone Mountain. And I just found it all really fascinating because, as we're talking about mounds and, cave cave relics and things, this could very simply be something that there used to be a painting or a carving on the side of Stone Mountain to signify its importance, to signify where you were. And then they may have paid to get it done over with their sculpture on top of potential indigenous sculpture, because this place has very high resonance to indigenous culture because it's a massive, like I said, 8-mile piece of quartz.
Wow.
I thought that was my favorite dig of the day so far.
8 mile of quartz.
Yeah, man.
Can you guys hear me at all?
Oh, you sound better.
Yeah, come in, Raven.
Yeah, but for some reason I can't get back to you guys. I don't know what's going on.
But your audio sounds so much better.
Well, audio, but I can't see you guys, and I can only hear you because there's a little murmur over the microphone on my phone, and for some reason it won't come to my headset. I don't know what the deal is.
Here, I'll pop you off and pop you back in. Yeah. So so if anybody's interested, look up the Venable brothers. That's Venable brothers. It's a little bit of a rabbit hole. Washington, D.C. law firm connected to the Ku Klux Klan. The fuck? Oh goodness. Yeah, so what about you, Dan? What's the best dig of the
unicorns day up on Crystal Mountain.
Oh, you saw? Oh, no way, bud.
Yeah, there's unicorns on Crystal Mountain.
Unicorn horns are all pure quartz. And
are they? I've never heard that before. Are unicorns' horns pure quartz?
Pure quartz. It's like their pineal gland is so protruding over years of crystallization. It has just turned to pure quartz, and it's a receptor. Wow. No, absolutely. And they touch horns.
I think I recently just heard that the Tuatha used to ride on unicorns. I don't know if that's true, but
it's definitely true.
Fairy tales.
Oh, here we go. We got Raven coming over here.
It was so weird because apparently when I went, something happened and it shut my camera and mic off.
We were getting too juicy with the runes. So can we dive in for the people listening? We got 6 amazing humans on the stream. Can we dive into your concept of the proto rune?
in just 1 second. I'm having a weird technical thing.
Your audio
Did that
sounds
echo
great,
for
by
you
the
guys?
way. No, no echo.
Okay, I'm going to try to say this. Apparently, I'm on here twice.
Yeah.
One's playing your audio, one's showing your video. It's hilarious.
Double
And
the
you guys
fun.
are like double echoing now. It's so weird.
Ooh, you're gonna have to turn audio off on one of your devices.
How's that?
There we go.
There you go.
There we are. Good to go, brother. Good to go.
Wait, can you see me? Hello?
No, we can't see you, but we can hear you, and so that's good.
Okay, fantastic. We'll just roll with hearing. Just a second. What is going on with this? This is so weird. Okay, I don't have it. Is there a way you can invite me back in from your end?
I'm professional and I know exactly what I'm doing here. Here we go. That's as good as we're gonna get.
What was the question you asked me? Ask me the question again.
Well, so you talked a little bit about your master painting of the runes that you're working on, but I wanted to get deeper in on the concept of the proto rune.
Okay, so the short version of, well, it's never short, but the short version of the story is that when I first became interested in runes, this would have been about 1986 is when I really got interested. And when that happened, I, followed the path that many people do. I got the Ralph Blum Book of the Runes, thing that a lot of people do. And I kind of started following those normal paths, and I became increasingly dissatisfied with the answers that they were providing, because they would provide an answer, but they wouldn't explain why that was an answer. They were just saying it just is, and that's never an answer for a person like me. Just because is not an answer. So I dove very deeply. Like I went way down the rabbit hole for a big chunk of my life. And the reason I call them proto runes is that, kind of like the language Proto-Germanic, these are potentially hypothetical, but they are hypothetical because I was trying to find what the actual root meaning, what the root origin of the runes were. And a lot of people think of them, of course, popularly in the context of Lord of the Rings or Vikings, or in some cases even the SS and other elements. But from my perspective, those are either grounded in what I kind of consider to be dogmatic academics and romanticism. So, and I was just not finding the answers I was looking for. So, using primarily etymology, the origin of words and language, I started tracing back the rune names, the Proto-Germanic, Elder Futhark rune names. And as I did that, I started realizing all sorts of things about not just the runes, but elements of Norse mythology, elements of Norse mythology, connections to other systems that seem like parallels with other systems like Greek myth and Egyptian myth, even to a degree Sumerian and Hindu myth. And the conclusion that I ultimately came to is that the runes were not from Europe, that their origins are actually in Central Asia. And it's possible they have connected origins before that. But I feel like, based on everything that I've seen, that they represent what I would describe as expressions of a belief system, and possibly even a whole body of knowledge, very ancient, that probably has its origins in the horse tribes of Central Asia. So, and that was before the migrations to Scandinavia that then eventually became the migrations into Central Europe, which is where the Germanic tribes sort of rose. And of course, it was the language used by them, or an alphabet. Alphabet's the wrong word. A phonetic system used by them, I'll say that, to clarify. And so, anyway, what the proto-runes are, which is what I refer to them as, these are based on all the conclusions I've come to, all the things I've seen, all of the, evidence that's available to me. These are probably, this is a possibility of what the runes originally looked like before they went through the process from formal, kind of a more formal writing, maybe even in, a clay medium or other mediums, to being carved predominantly into wood. Because the act of carving a rune into wood, you have to accommodate the wood grain. And accommodating the wood grain requires, like, for example, if you turned a piece of wood sideways and the grain was going horizontally and you were going to carve a rune, you could easily do the upright stave of the rune across the grain. But if you had a curve in a rune, it'd be easier to do two angled lines as opposed to a curve, just with the tip of a knife. And I've done this. The other bit is that if you had runes that had horizontal elements to them, so for example, let's just say hypothetically that one rune was actually an equilateral cross. Well, the problem is that with wood grain, if you do a vertical line like this and a horizontal line, the horizontal line will get lost in the wood grain. So the most logical thing to do is to take the figure and turn it like this as an X, so that you have an equilateral cross. It's still equilateral, but it goes equally across the wood grain and is readable. So what the master grid allows to happen is it allows for, in a consistent logical construct, which is connected to the 9 worlds and other concepts in Norse mythology, Yggdrasil, the tree, the high tree. It allows for the runes to be shown in their relationship. And one point I'd like to make very quickly, and that is that if you go back to in Norse myth where the runes came from, this is when Odin went and sacrificed himself, hung himself on the tree. And by the way, I love this. The hanging on the tree is not really probably the way most people think about it. Are you guys still there?
Yeah.
Hello? Oh, okay.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yeah, we are here. We are here.
It got super quiet and I can't see anything. So
Oh no.
I could be talking to myself in the corner of the room with the cat. The cat's sick of hearing all this. But
we know about the proto runes. Okay, give us kitty meow mix.
Yeah, that's right. And just bugger off. But the one important thing, just this little side note, I think because of the significance and presence of Christianity in Western culture, when you say someone hung themselves from a tree, there is this almost crucifixion idea that comes with that has actually been perpetuated through interpretive Norse myth, over the centuries since the Viking era. And really, if you go into what the lore is you're hung like with a noose. You're hung by the neck. And so Odin hung himself by his neck from a branch and hung over the pool of Mimir. And on the surface, and as he passed because he died, the whole point is he died. But through this death and rebirth, which is essentially what it was, he saw the runes in the surface of the pool of Mimir. Now, what's interesting about
Mimir,
and what's interesting about that, now I won't go into that. That's a whole Norse mythology thing. I'm not going to do that right now. But the thing that's significant is that the implications are that the runes existed before Odin did. They already existed when he did this. All that happened is by him doing this, he was able to see them. And what's interesting about that is that it's very consistent with a lot of tribal ideas. You see it in Native American culture, you see it in, Siberian shaman culture, where the adept, the wise, not the wise, the novice, the pupil goes out into the wilderness and fasts or engages in some other kind of, almost death-like, ritual to find their power. You see that in the warrior cultures in the Native America. You see it in other places in the world where people. It's like the boy dies, the man is born. But it's more in this case. It's like you go out to find your power, and so I feel like one of the hardest things to do with this whole discussion of the runes, because the runes have come to us via the Norse mythos and Norse culture, it can be very challenging to peel the veneer of that off and look at them independently of Viking Norse culture. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like to look. Go ahead.
Yeah, I totally do, and I have this question on the tip of my tongue, but I wanted to obviously wait until you were finished speaking, but it kind of alludes to what you're saying now, or what I think you're getting at. And I was gonna say, what other? Oh shit, he dropped out of the stream. Legit. God damn it. Of course, my long fucking winded responses always get the guests to drop out. Look at that, everybody. Look what homie Romy did. And bored somebody to death. Are you surprised? Are you fucking surprised? Anyways, back to Crystal Mountain, man. I tell you, it's an 8-mile long mountain, man. There's unicorns there, and they're touching each other's piezoelectric, having little seraphim dance upon their tails.
Do they like grind their horns against each other and then like create sparks? And
yeah, so you ever heard of the Merkaba? The Merkaba is what happens when two unicorns
created by two unicorns.
Yeah.
No shit. You don't say.
Absolutely. That was a weird place to come back in. I completely lost you.
Oh, boom. Well,
so what was your question? Just really quickly tell me the question
again. What other cultures have something very similar to runes? Like, what is the hidden? Because were you alluding to that we associate runes with Norse mythology, but there may be something bigger and broader, maybe more on a global scale as opposed to specifically northern?
I hesitate to say on a global scale, but it is interesting to note that the Hungarians use a very similar symbol system, and of course the Hungarians with Attila the Hun came from Central Asia as well. There are several scripts, alphabetic scripts that there are several scripts that have characters that are very rune-like. And that is a real danger that you have to be conscious of, is that just because something looks like something doesn't mean it's even associated with that, because, it's possible to come up with things. It's also possible that one group saw what another group was doing and adapted it for themselves, and it has nothing to do with what the other group was doing. Honestly, a really good example of that is cuneiform, the Sumerian script of cuneiform. Because the Sumerians came up with cuneiform, and it was one of the, if not the first written language in the world, it was certainly one of the first. All over the Near East, cultures adopted that script, and it became essentially the court script, even though multiple different languages were being used. It was being used to the word just went out of my head.
Communicate.
Is that funny? I'm talking about words, and the word went out of my head. No, to express. to express. So the cuneiform was used to express completely different phonetic language systems. Like, for example, the Hittites used cuneiform. The Babylonians used cuneiform. The Assyrians used cuneiform. There were cuneiform tablets that made their way to Egypt, because when kings were communicating with, if a king was communicating with a pharaoh and they were sending a message, They would take a clay tablet, they would use the cuneiform process, and that would go to Egypt. And the Egyptians knew, obviously somebody there knew how to read it. So I only bring that up to say that's one of those dangers, that just because something looks like something doesn't necessarily mean that when you see something written over here that's using the same general phonetic structure that a language is using, that it's going to translate across. So anyway, so my thought, one of the thoughts, well, many thoughts. There's many thoughts and they're dripping out of my head.
Yes.
I don't know if I expressed to everyone. I got very little sleep last night, so I'm a little goofy. But
we're playing in the ether, y'all.
So long and the short of it is that the proto-rune structure that I came up with is inspired by a relationship to this grid. And this grid actually represents as many as 3 different things. Let me talk about the grid for a second, a little more, because it is fairly important. So someone's got a message up and I'm trying to read it. Very tiny. I'd love to know a bit more.
It's Gailey asking.
Sorry.
I'd love to know a bit more on his thoughts of what separates the 3 eights. I'm not sure how to say that word. AETTES. The basic structure of 3 sets of 8. I think he talked about it in a show, but let's get the juice.
Okay, well, I can do that in the context of what I was about to say about this. So,
nice.
So basically, again, a big epiphany came about a year ago, actually. I just had this moment of clarity where I was thinking about 2 things. The structure of the great tree Yggdrasil and the great tree Yggdrasil and the 9 worlds. And of course, and anybody that knows the myths, the general idea is that there's this tree. The tree connects the 9 worlds, but it is the axis mundi. It's the center of the world. And when I always have struggled with the depictions of Yggdrasil that you see whenever anyone draws them out. And it's this idea of like a vertical trunk. I'm trying to use my camera. Vertical tree trunk like this, and that there's a central area, and there's an upper area in the branches, and there's an area by the roots. And that each layer, and is that, my air conditioner just kicked on? Can you hear that?
No, you're good.
No, you're good.
Okay, good. Okay, so believe me, we need the air conditioning. But anyway, so each of these 3 layers had 3 of the 9 worlds associated with them, and the middle one had Midgard, which is where we live, right? But it also had, let's see, I think it's different depending on which illustration you look at. But I became very disenchanted with this methodology because I realized it put Asgard in the branches of the tree, it put Midgard somewhere in the middle, and it put, Niflheim and Helheim by the roots of the tree. And the problem I had with that is I looked at it and I said, that's a Christian system. That's not Norse mythology. That's the Christian system, that system of hell is down here, earth is here, and heaven is up here. It's very structurally hierarchical. And I went, okay, that weirds me out. So then I started thinking again about etymology, about words. And I went, okay, so we know that in the Angles, there's a rune in the Elder Futhark, there's a rune that the name of it is Ansus. Ansus is, if you talk to Ralph Blum, it signals, it's a little bit ambiguous, but it seems to talk about communicating with the gods. That seems to be the connection. So when you go to the Anglo-Saxon rune strand, the same rune has a different name, and the name is OS, us, right? Well, so we know, I saw that. Thanks, man. We saw, so the thing is that if you go into the Anglo-Saxon language, what is it? The Anglo-Saxon language is it's a primitive dialect, Germanic dialect. It's German, the way it was spoken before it went through the processes in Central Europe to become this more formalized thing. So it's an archaic form of German. Well, we know that the word os, which is written os, but it can also be as, because in German, the a sound, a is a, which is why it's Allfather, os, Osgard, Ossatru, Osser. That's because that's how they pronounce that a. It's not turned into a unless it's something else, unless, you know, it's got different punctuation over it if it's changed from a. So anyway, I was thinking about that, and I went, wait a minute, Osgard. What would Osgard mean? Well, Osgard means something. Gard means ground or land, right? Middle Earth. Osgard is something Earth, right? And so I went, well, what is os in German? And I started realizing that in German, os is the root of Ost. Ost means east, right? It's also the root of Ostara, which is the goddess of spring. It's also the root in which Ost, and if you think about that, Ost is the dawn, right? Ost is the dawn. Ostara is spring. There's a clear connection between this idea of Ost. And I said, what do they all have in common? Well, Os, for all intents and purposes, seems to mean sky. In other words, Osgard is not up. Osgard is east. Osgard is the dawn. That's where the gods live. They live where the world is born from every day, right? So I went, wait a minute. Okay, let's just follow that model. Well, if Osgard is east, and we know that Midgard, Middle Earth, so Osgard is sky Earth. Midgard is Middle Earth, which, by the way, I know you guys will love this. Think about the implications of sky Earth. Vimana, right? Orbit. There are a lot of possibilities of what that could potentially imply, where the gods were from. And what's interesting is that there's another rune, the T rune, which some people call it the Tyr rune, but that's actually not correct. I mean, some people call it that, and it's not incorrect, but it's not consistent. The real name of the rune is Tiw, T-I-W-A-Z is the way it's pronounced or written in Proto-Germanic, but that's the same thing. Anytime you get that A-Z sound at the end of a rune, Tiw-As, sky, meaning it's the celestial form, it's the grand form of it. So if you say Tiw, what does Tiw mean? Well, Tiw obviously has this implication that it means chieftain. So what is Tiw-As? Sky chieftain. In other words, the All-Father. It's literally going back to that root. And what's weird about it, that one in particular, is that there is an Apache word that is the same word to us that means the same thing. It means sky father. And we know they came from Central Asia a long time ago, which is an indication of how old the language connection might be. Also, when they started doing the study of Indo-Europe, what?
Tiwanaku.
Tiwanaku, yeah. Well, and of course, it's interesting to note that in Chinese, what is the word for heaven? Tian.
I don't know.
Tian, right?
Oh.
So it's Tian. So
Tiananmen Square. It's Heaven
which
Square.
is really an ironic name when you think about it. It's the heavens, because it was before the Tiananmen Square was established when the forbidden, the palace was still the Forbidden City, when it was still the emperor. I mean, that square has been there a long time, and it's the square of heaven because it's before. Literally, their understanding was that the celestial temple, the Forbidden City, was in fact the heavenly realm, and that the emperor was in fact the son of heaven. So you've got these really strong things there. But what was interesting is when they started doing the study of Indo-European language groups, where they were comparing, they started realizing that the word for father in India, in Sanskrit, was very similar. It could be related to the same word in Latin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what's interesting about that Q word is that Q word turns out to be the root of some very significant words to us. Tiu, and understand I say tiu like T, but it's really not. It's more like a D. It's like a halfway between a T and a D. So it's D, That's where Deus comes from. That's where Deus comes from. That's where Zeus comes from. They're all from the same root, and they all mean the same thing. Sky Father. All of them do. So again, the reason I bring that up is that it's about that suffix on some of those rune names where you get Kuas. Well, it means chieftain, but it means sky chieftain. If you say Ekwas, right? Ekwas is Ek is horse. Ekwas means the celestial horse. And it's also interesting to note with that particular rune name, Equus. Equus means horse in Latin. But if you take the rune name, it's Ek. Ek is the actual word, E-H, Ek. Ek. Ekwas. So it means sky horse. So Equus root is probably actually sky horse. And by sky, it doesn't mean that the horse runs
like
through the sky.
equestrian.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's
there
it.
You go.
And that's exactly it. And even equine and all those other words that come from that. So, and that all means horse. So what I came to was that sky horse. Oh, interesting idea. Sky horse. Who is this? Slick Dissident? Put a little flying saucer. That's a great thought. And that's really relevant to what I'm about to say about this. So what's interesting about this is that I started realizing something. The name Yggdrasil, which is the name that everybody associates with the world tree in Norse mythology. Well, let's break that word apart. Yig. What is Yig? Well, Yig is a word for death. It's a name for death, but it is also a name of Odin. So what is Drasil? Drasil is horse in another dialect. So Yggdrasil could be death horse, but what it actually means is Odin's horse.
So Yggdrasil could be the 8-legged horse that he's riding on.
And also Sleipnir is the horse. So, and we know the horse is an 8-legged horse. And the one thing that you hear about the myth is, what does the horse give? What power does it give Odin? It gives Odin the ability to travel through all 9 worlds. And there's the 9 worlds right there. Midgard is in the center. Asgard is in the east. Helheim is in the west. Niflheim, land of ice, home of ice, is in the north. Muspelheim, which is the home of fire, is in the south. And then you have Alfheim, Jotunheim, Vanaheim, and Svartalfheim. And that structure actually follows a very logical succession in the first 6 runes, but also the 8. So you notice it's 8 on the outside. And so someone asked earlier, they said, what was the question? It was the 8 ring, the 8 separation. Okay, so one of the things we know also is that in Norse mythology and Norse culture, the number 9 is of great significance, right? The number 9 is of great significance. And so every time, and because we know Midgard means Middle Earth, right? Middle. It's where Tolkien got Middle Earth from. It's just an anglicized translation of Midgard. Literally, it's like a literal translation. So if you think that, okay, sorry, I lost my train of thought for just a second. I went, it was the sleepy tired went in my head and said, the little demons came out. We're supposed to keep them in. We're supposed to keep the little demons in, right? That's the deal. Anyway, so what I realize is that because Futork, the reason it's called a Futork is that every rune strand everywhere, the first 6 runes are the same. No matter what rune strand you look at, the first 6 runes are the same. After that, there are variations sometimes.
So it's not septenary. It's in roots of 6.
Well, that is, but there are 2 runes after it that seem to be pretty consistent, and that is the rune for it's called I think the Proto-Germanic name is Gebo. That's the G rune, and it comes from the word gif or gifu, gift. It means gift. And it's represented as an X, but my belief is that it's actually an equilateral cross, the original one. And that I also have developed this very strong, I've come to this conclusion that I'm pretty secure in, that most ancient symbols, especially the big ones, the worldwide ones, are two-dimensional representations of three-dimensional ideas. So, for example, we think of a cross. Well, I don't think a cross is a cross. I think a cross is, in fact, an axis and a disk. It represents an equator and an axis, because those are central principles for almost every orbiting everything in the whole universe that we know about. Almost everything that's spinning has an axis and it has an equator. And so what would be the significance of that? Well, this then being gift means that the rune represents the gift of the world, the gift of existence, right?
Don't look a eight-legged horse. Don't look a eight-legged gift horse in the mouth. That's what I mean.
Exactly. Especially if you know the story about where that horse came from, really don't ask too many questions. So anyway, but the point is I started, oh, and by the way, this symbol is based, it's based on a symbol that we call the Helm of Awe. It's been come to be called the Helm of Awe. And it's a very common one. You see a lot of people that are I'm feeling my Viking vibe, and they'll get them tattooed on them, and they're like, it's like an 8-spoked wheel with a circle around the center of the intersection, and then it's got little cups on the outside, which when you go into research that, the thing you find is that they don't know where that came from. Like, there's no clear source of origin for that symbol. And that's really significant to me, because that means that probably the Vikings didn't come up with it. They brought it with them. It was something that came from an earlier place. And it's interesting to note also that the Siberian shamans and sometimes even the Lapland or Sami tribes will have created a similar symbol or related symbol that they'll put on their drums. They're like the shamans will put them on their drums, on the head of the drum. Variations thereof. And so what I realized about this is that this is probably, that Helm of Awe is the 8-legged horse. It is Yggdrasil. That's what this is. And that the runes then are actually symbols that connect relationships between Midgard and the 9 worlds. That's what the runes really are. So if you understand that and you lay the runes on the grid, and you understand that, for example, the Tura rune, Turasas, I think is the Germanic name. Turasas, which means monster or giant. It is the third rune, Futork, and it's not actually a TH. Everybody thinks it's th. It's not th. It's actually halfway between a T and a D. So it's not. That's why his name is Donner. That's why Donner is thunder in German. And Donner is also the name of Thor in German. It's Donner, not Tuner, Donner, because that's the right way you pronounce it. So when you understand that, Tur, which is Turasas, and notice it ends with the as again, Turasas, right? So it's not the monster or giant, it's the great idea of the monster and giant. And here's what's interesting about that. What's the most significant antagonist in Norse mythology? Most significant. What's Loki? The one they talk about more? The giants. The giants are the big thing. And Ymir, who was the first giant, was the biggest giant of them all. And it's the third rune, is giant or monster. And when you lay it out on the grid, it falls in the realm of Jotunheim, which is the realm of the giants. So what I'm saying is that it's starting to come together very clearly and very quickly, these associations. So the outer ring seems to cover foundational, almost, I hate to use the word eternal, but almost primordial idea. Yeah, well, no more like primordial, like
Yeah.
the beginning of things, right?
Yeah.
It's the great cow, it's Ymir, it's Asgard, which is representative of the Asur. It's the creation of humans. It's fire. It's this really primal creation structure around which everything else sort of grows. So that's the ring, and the last two runes of that strand that are the ones that can sometimes have changed. But I found it in the Germanic, the Elder Futhorc, which is called the Germanic Futhorc sometimes. Futhorc is it's most consistent to have Gifu or Gebu and then Wunyo as the last one. And Wunyo looks like a capital P, but an angular capital P. And then Gifu or Gebu looks like, well, it's represented as an X usually, but my feeling is that it's probably a cross, that they couldn't figure out how to cut across the grain in a way that you could read it. So the wood grain. So those are the first 8, and they do seem to represent everything from the fundamental beginning ideas, even things before. Nice ring, dude. That was good. Double ring. But can you make it into a little sailing ship that goes through the other one? That's what I want to know. So
I'm curious about the realms, like the 9 realms and the cosmological beliefs. Like, do these tie into the planets at all? Like potential like Merkaba vortex to other planets or realms?
I suspect highly that they do not. I think that what they represent are elements. The one thing you have to also keep in mind about everything Norse and a lot of other systems as well, a lot of them are predicated on the tension of opposites, so contrast, right? The Egyptian mythology, the Ogdoad, is all about 4 beings, 4 entities or forces that have 2 aspects, a male and female aspect. And when you arrange those in a spoked wheel, they all represent very, negative things. And when you cross them, they actually create light, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's something about this tension dynamic. And
Hermetic.
then if you go into, and in fact, I believe a lot of medieval alchemy, the hexagon, the whole hexagram kind of idea is, again, the hexagram is not what the actual symbol is. The hexagram is a 2-dimensional representation of a 3-dimensional idea. I think those 2 triangles are not triangles that make up the hexagram. I think that they are 2 tetrahedrons. I think that it's talking about 3-dimensional space. Why tetrahedrons? Because a tetrahedron is the simplest geometric way to define a sphere. Yes, to define a sphere. And therefore, what they're really talking about in that structure, yes, exactly, that structure you're holding up, what they're really talking about is 2 spheres that exist in opposition to each other. That it's the way to talk about the fact that you have 2 spheres that are existing in the same space at the same time is to use the Merkaba shape, because then you can see both spheres represented in the same space at the same time. But because there's 2 tetrahedrons, there's one pointing down, there's one pointing up, and they're interwoven. So those are the 2 spheres that are represented there, and that shows the dynamic tension. In fact, one of the things I'm going to do as this painting goes forward is I'm going to demonstrate that, because again, this is a circle with 8 on it, right? But how else in a 2-dimensional format could you talk about all 8 things laid out flat? So you can see the 9th at the center, because that's where the number 9. The number 9 is all about the nexus. It's all about where things come together. It's the center. That's why my feeling is all the other Heims existed before Midgard. Midgard was the Johnny Come Lately. So I think it was created by Odin and his brothers slaying Ymir and cutting his body apart and building Midgard out of his body. So what I think is that probably if that particular realm had a number, it would be the number 9. Midgard is the 9 because the 9 is the completion. It's the center. And if you look at the other, what do you have? You have 8, but you have 2 sets of 4. Yep. 2 sets of 4. All you have to do is go triangles, and you've got the 2 tetrahedrons. It's right there. In fact, I don't know. Can you guys see this at all?
Yeah, it's pretty good. You could be a little closer, but I see pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can you see this line that goes like this that defines
the major
square?
The major like the diagonal square. Yes, absolutely.
And then you see this square, right?
Yeah.
The other one. Okay. Have you seen the pictures that were taken in 1940 by the British aviator that flew over the Great Pyramid at dawn on the spring equinox? He took pictures, and it was the first time that it was revealed that the Great Pyramid does not have 4 sides, it has 8. Because there are actually dividing lines that go down. So if this is the pyramid, it actually has a dividing line that goes this way that you can only see when the dawn sun on the vernal equinox shines on it, and you see the indentation, you see the shadows. And I thought about that, and I thought about this, and I went, wait a minute. Okay. In fact, I haven't talked to you guys about this because this was an epiphany I had after our show about this. I looked at this and I went, well, we know that the pyramids are actually arranged with the cardinal points, right? The actual pyramids in Giza.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at those and I went, if they understood the double tetrahedron structure, and they wanted to do a structure that actually talked about it. Now, some people might say, well, why wouldn't they just build a tetrahedron on the ground? Because then you can only talk about 3 of the triangles. You can't talk about the one that's on the ground. This makes it possible to talk about all 4 of them. So the symbolic significance of the 4, because if you look at the pyramid, those are equilateral triangles. They're just laid into a 4-sided pyramid like this. And if you take into account these lines that go this way, those lines line up along those breaks on the Great Pyramid that define it into 8. Which means if I'm right about this and about what I just observed there, they're acknowledging the invisible pyramid. They're acknowledging the other tetrahedron that's not visible. That pyramid actually is documenting the connection of this realm and the other realm that the 2 tetrahedrons coming together would do. If I'm right. And the geometry says I am. And we only listen to the geometry because screw everybody else. No, I'm kidding. And it's interesting to note also.
Would it be almost mirrored, like directly on top, or kind of like?
Well, I kind of think of it just like, think of it either with the other invisible pyramid, the point would be pointing down. That's one possibility. The other possibility is it literally is just this. They're just offset from each other.
Oh, yeah.
So if you took them laying over each other and then went like this, and here's an interesting thing to note. Ready? Where is the entrance to the Great Pyramid?
Underneath.
It's on the side
It's on that line. It's on that line.
Mm-hmm.
Which means it says you enter the pyramid at the intersection between the invisible and the visible pyramid.
Oh, the hidden wall right there. That's the path.
Exactly. And it goes into what? And notice, even when you go in that entrance, and it goes to the long chamber to the king's chamber, or it goes the other way, to the queen's chamber, they're still on that line.
Gallery.
They're still on that line.
Yeah.
They still follow that intersection because they don't follow the physical exterior hard corners of the pyramid. It's on the center. It's on the invisible dividing line. In other words, they built a portal that allows you to go from this realm into the other realm.
So,
somebody mentioned Asterix. Asterix has 8 sides. It also starts with Osterix.
Oh, okay, now I see it. 8-sided star. Oh, Ishtar. Yeah. Well, and it's funny, you find this number 8. I mean, let me take you through them really quick. The Buddhists came up with the Eightfold Path. It's the eight-spoked wheel, the Eightfold Path. The entrances to the Forbidden City, it had 4 sides. It had 8 doors. It's like it goes on and on and on. Feng Shui is based on an octagonal house.
Feng Shui.
Feng Shui is based on an octagonal structure, right? There's 8 aspects to it. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Norse, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8. And I think what the 888 really is again, I think it's all talking about the same thing. And I'm going to do something a little unorthodox here. I'm going to tip my camera up so that you can see that hanging above my easel is the message from my visitors, right? From long ago.
Yeah.
And the thing about that, the more that I've studied that, the more I realize they're talking about the same thing. This is not a separate, the rune conversation is not a separate conversation from that conversation, because it's all talking about the same geometries.
So this could be, this is like, where do magnetics have a play into this? I feel like there's something about Earth's using the attunement of land and the attunement of an area to maybe access these portals, or to be able to, I don't know, maybe it's the magnets in our own fucking head. Maybe it's just charging up and getting the right amount of charge into the magnetite clusters that exist in our brain. But you know, I'm really interested in the and you talked about this on a show we've done before, but maybe the Egyptian cosmological beliefs and how they kind of correspond with the Norse cosmological beliefs and their stories.
Well, when we say cosmological, I'm going to speak from where I know, and where I know is more cosmogenic. So cosmogenic stories are the stories of creation in every culture. Cosmogenic, right? Cosmogenesis. And interesting parallels, and that's the thing I found here as well. Once you start to understand that Asgard is east and Helheim is west, now how does that? Because what is Helheim? First of all, let's talk about Hela and Helheim for a minute. First of all, our word hell that it comes into, you know, Western Christianity actually is from
Hellenistic.
the Norse. Well, it's the North. No, it's hell. It's Hela from Norse mythology. It's because she is she watches over the unsung dead, the unknown dead. It's the realm of the dead, and it's interesting because it's in the West. Right? It would be opposite of Asgard. This is generation. This is creation. And that's the east and spring and dawn. This is the autumn equinox and death and the land of the dead. In fact, our modern sort of Western conception of hell it's very funny to me, because it's this weird conglomeration of like 3 different mythologies that are pretty obvious once you break it apart. What are the descriptions of hell? Let's just talk about hell for a second. Why not? We're here. Let's talk about hell.
Is it like the duat? Is it like the duat?
No. You have to. Let me take you through it. So, part of our image of hell comes from the Greek mythological concept of Hades. Right? Hades was the god of the underworld, and that's the realm of the dead. So that's kind of where that whole hell is down came from. That's a Greek mythological idea. He's gone. That was fantastic, Roman. It was like he just sort of went, and then he disappeared and went down farther. He's just climbing away. It was funny because it was a progressive thing to watch. He was like here, and then he was here, and then he was down, and then he was getting up, and then he just disappeared into the floor. But
into the void.
So that's where kind of our idea of the hell of the underworld. That's Hades. Where did the lake of fire come from? Well, do you know the Egyptian Book of the Dead at all? You know what the Egyptian Book of the Dead is, right?
Lake of Fire reminds me of an alchemist's wet dream. You know, near the Vulcan, near the volcano, the magmatic entrances.
And that's what I actually thought for a long time until one thing became abundantly clear.
Oh.
If you were in Egypt, right? You're an Egyptian person. What are you surrounded by? at the time of the height of Egyptian civilization, it wasn't desert around the Nile. It was actually savanna, kind of like the Serengeti, right? It was more savanna. And they figured that out because animals depicted in Egyptian art have not lived in that area for a long time, and they require kind of a savanna environment, certain species of baboons and gazelles, which have been very clearly depicted in Egyptian reliefs, which means that probably when the pyramids were in, full nice form, they weren't in the desert. They were actually they were surrounded by foliage. There was actually, savanna there.
Lush.
As the weather patterns changed and the Atlas mountains started creating more and more of a rain shadow, the Sahara Desert was actually created very quickly. A lot of people don't realize that. It was basically created almost from the end of the Ice Age. Like it's a very new structure, but it grew pretty quickly, and it wiped out the sub-Saharan, savanna that was part of Egypt. Anyway, if you look at the pyramids and where they're built across the River Nile from the rest. Why? Because that's the West. The West is the portal to the other world. The West is that's where the sun sets, right? So if you notice the Sphinx is looking east. It's looking across the Nile to the east because it's heralding the new dawn. It's looking toward the dawn, which in the desert was a big deal.
It's a homage to the gods.
Exactly. And some people, as you know, Graham Hancock among them, has argued that originally the Sphinx faced east on the vernal equinox, and that aligned with the constellation Leo, and that there was a connection between the rising of Leo and the vernal equinox as being the rebirth of the world, or new life. So anyway, the Egyptian Book of the Dead goes kind of like this. It's basically a system of incantations and spells and other things that were buried with people to help them in their journey in the afterlife, which of course we know in Egyptian culture was a huge deal, right? You're mummified, and then your Ba and your Ka have to make their way to the Duat, basically. And
Kabbalah.
Yeah, well, yep. And then there's a point at which you go through a number of things, but then you come across Anubis, the funerary jackal god, right? You come across Anubis, who's holding a scale. And that scale is the scale of Ma'at. And what they do is they would take the heart of the deceased and put it in one side, and then take a feather and put it in the other side. And if you didn't match, if they didn't balance, right? In other words, if your heart was not free of guilt and sin and problems and difficulty, it was light, you passed the test. You passed out of this world. If it was off like this, in other words, like your heart was heavy. Go ahead.
Sounds like a trickster carnival game. You can never fucking win that one.
I like that. There should have been just so you were really confused what was going on. But what happens if your heart was heavier than the feather, then you were thrown into a lake of fire, and this crocodilian kind of creature came up and ripped you apart forever. Now, here's the thing to think about. The reason I brought up the whole desert thing is in desert countries, when you look out across the desert at midday, and especially a flat like hardpan desert, what do you see?
Water, fire. It's a mirage. It's a fire.
It's a mirage.
Yeah.
It's a lake of fire. Literally a lake of fire. And
can it manifest though? Can a mirage manifest? Like legit? Can you pull it into reality?
A mirage?
Yeah.
I would think of a mirage kind of like a mirror. Right? Where you're on one side and it's reflecting, but if you could engage it, it's kind of like the Rainbow Bridge, but Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge. It's kind of in that realm. It's there, but it's never accessible, right? If there's this idea that, and what happens? The idea, and think about it, for Egyptians, what would be the worst kind of exile that you could possibly have? To be sent out into the desert by yourself to die slowly and miserably in the sun. but do that for eternity. That's the lake of fire. That's the eternal lake of fire. And so, and the reason I bring that up is that Hela, the realm of the dead in Norse mythos, is actually a land of forever ice and twilight. In other words, the concept of a hellish death is based on culturally where you're from. Because I'm telling you right now that if you've gone to the Vikings and said, hey, when you die, dude, if you screw up, you're going to go to this place where it's warm all the time. The Vikings are going to go, okay, sweet, let's bring it. Where if you go to the Egyptians, they're going to go, we like the river and the Nile and water and shade, and that sucks. So it's a great right. And if you now let's talk about Hades for a second. Hades is very interesting in that what was one of the biggest threats to the Greek culture, and not just Greek culture, ancient Greek culture, but also Trojan. We're talking Macedonian. We're talking even Roman. In that area of the world, volcanoes and earthquakes were big, giant problems on a fairly regular basis. In fact, a lot of the classical Greek architecture was specifically designed to help those monuments resist collapsing under earthquake, under the force of earthquakes. So, and they knew that lava came out of the ground. They knew that when mountains like Vesuvius erupted, obviously it was coming out of the ground. It was hot, belching smoke. So the idea of the underworld being a hellish place is inspired by their environment, right? So, and of course, what's the whole purpose of a hellish thing? It's actually has nothing to do with the hell thing. It has to do with manipulating people into behaving while they're alive. That's really what all these hell ideas are about, right?
But when does the West become the East and the East become the West? If you're just circling back around,
Well, by what definition? That's a broad question. By what definition?
I don't even know. Like, I'm just thinking about, like, every time I guess it's from wherever you're standing, but it's like direction is just like constantly moving all the time. And it's just an interesting thing to think about with constant motion.
That's true. I would say to speak to the historical precedent of it, are all of our words related to directions? Remember, latitude and longitude and time are all based on Greenwich, England. So, right, it's the Greenwich Mean Time is the original time. And we know that in the word in German language, Ost is east. Ost is that way from Central, from wherever, Ukraine, Germany, whatever. So east, I think that initially probably the east was defined by the western wall of the mountains of China. That really was the beginning of east. Because as soon as you crossed into those mountains and crossed into China, you were in lands that made no sense to anything west of it, right? It was a different culture, different world because of the mountains. The same thing is true that if you go through, down to Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, that area, the stands above Afghanistan and Pakistan. Well, Pakistan, of course, used to be part of India, and it was part of India for thousands of years. But there's a place called the Khyber Pass, which is the main passageway between Central Asia and India. So I would say that, like, Khyber Pass in many ways probably was the entryway to the true, like, that was the boundary to the true East. Because as soon as you cross the Khyber Pass, you're in the Indian subcontinent. If you cross them, go into Mongolia and cross over the mountains, or go around Siberia and come up, through by Manchuria, that area, North Korea, Manchuria, you come right into northern China. And as soon as you come into those areas, the people look different, the language is different, the food is, everything's different from what you're used to if you were even in Central Asia, except for in the context of trade. We know that the Silk Road there was a lot of communication through Central Asia and those areas and the Middle East, what we call them. See, that's all that language, the Middle East. Well, that's because the East was India and China. Halfway between Europe and there was Anatolia and the area that we call the Middle East. So it became known as the Middle East from Europe, specifically from England. It was like, oh, that's the Middle East. That's the Far East. Those two words, Middle East, Far East. Mm-hmm. What's the definition of the Far East? India, Exotica, Bali, right?
What's funny is like the bringing up the concept of like, the East is this godly realm or where the gods rise, and it's that birth kind of effect, and like Western culture itself has seemingly just kind of hijacked all of the Eastern mysticism ways, like, Egyptian lore,
I don't know if that's really, I don't know if I would agree with that. I think that one of the things you have to take into account with all of this is that there was this period of time. I suggest everybody to take some time and study, look into the rise of the horse culture in Central Asia, because we do kind of have this geographic and chronological precept about, well, this is here and that's there, and this happened first because we encountered this, and this went like, there's this kind of linear historical approach to it. And I think that developed before it was really understood that the horse was domesticated in Central Asia, that the first people that actually went from hunting horses to eating horses and hunting and eating them to actually breaking them and riding them, which was a huge transformation. Just think about that. I always think about that and I just go, holy crap. So somebody, these people who are used to hunting mammoths and hunting camels and the other things that were in Central Asia, one day somebody looked at the horses that they'd been eating forever and went, I think we could ride those. Like somebody had that idea at some point.
It was ancient Roman. It was ancient homie Romy. He was like, I'm gonna fucking go try to ride that fucking horse.
Yep, I lassoed it up. Absolutely. Yep. I had these sweet boots that I made out of a special type of magnetite. Yes. I used bones and golden flakes, and I could float. I made little Vamana boots. It was super sweet. You guys should have seen it. It was great times. I'm telling you.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
He rubbed his unicorn horn against the horse's leg.
Whatever you need to do, man.
It was funny. We were talking about unicorns earlier, and then Gabe brought up the sky horse, and we were talking about that concept, and then kind of tied into a little double unicorn horns Merkabah situation.
Well, and that's a big important thing, I think, that one other thing I want to say is, okay, so if I'm just going to do a test, if I say to you Helm of Ah, right? And you know that the belief about the Helm of Ah is that if you put it on your helmet or you tattoo it on your forehead or it's on your shield, it makes you impervious in battle. That was the basic idea, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So if I say Helm of Ah, what do you picture in your head when I say those words? Helm of Ah. I'm asking Roman because I think I might have already asked Dan this question.
It almost sounds like the when it says like Helma Va, it almost sounds like maternal, and it sounds like almost like a hug from a maternal figure of sorts.
Yeah, that's probably a hug you wouldn't want. If you got hugged, by the way, sometimes it's also called the Helm of Terror, which I thought was interesting. Some interpretations are the Helm of Terror or the Helm of Awe, like awesome, awe.
Me and my mother's relationship was very interesting. She was a very terrorizing woman. No, I'm just kidding.
I like it. So the thing is that I was thinking about that, and of course, most time when say helm, what is helm? Helm is a helmet, it's a hat, it's your head, right? That's helm. And I went, wait a minute. Helm is also the rudder on a ship. What if that's the helm of awe? In other words, this is how you navigate, and that ties into the horse, right? The helm of awe is to drive the ship. The Sleipnir, Yggdrasil, as interpreted as Odin's horse. the helm of awe. And it's interesting, this horse thing is really important too, in the understanding that the runes came from Central Asia, because the horse, if you go into the Vikings, yeah, they had horses, but they were more like Shetland ponies. They weren't like horses like we think of horses. That kind of developed later through breeding. But the horses that the people of Central Asia, like the Tartars, rode, Tartaria. There's a whole other topic we can talk about. Tartaria.
Magic word.
Before all the horses were killed by the mud.
Ring the bell.
But the point is that what they think happened, what the current evidence seems to support, is that one group domesticated the horse, and then another group saw that they did this, and then adopted this skill from them, and those people became this giant, almost mobile civilization. They were a roving culture, kind of like the Mongols, where they were mobile, but they still had a more advanced and widespread cultural connection. And it was that and them riding back and forth across Central Asia and connecting with people, which created the Indo-European language group. It was actually them speaking their language and then influencing cultures all around them by contact, right? That's how the language spread. So what it would suggest is that if Proto-Germanic is related to a dialect of Anglo-Saxon, dialect of Anglo-Saxon is a descendant of Proto-Germanic, and Proto-Germanic is a good, because you realize it's just an educated guess. Proto-Germanic is an educated guess of everything in etymology they knew about the rise and development of the Germanic language, and this was their best guess about what the roots that language all came from, right? And that if you think about that,
through a specified narrative or a specified specific narrative or like type of, whoever was working at that time that created that system of what we now go off of, Proto-Germanic, like who the fuck even created that? Like, have we looked into those people? So
well,
it's like,
yeah. The Proto-Germanic, I would say that probably the Proto-Germanic idea rose out of people like J.R.R. Tolkien and other scholars at the turn of the century in Cambridge and Oxford that had access to all these original documents, original original copies of Beowulf, written in runes, but written in Anglo-Saxon in runes. It's funny, they had all of this material that was saved from the Middle Ages and from the Renaissance and even from before that were in monasteries and things that had been collected in places like Cambridge and Oxford, the University of Heidelberg, different places like that have a lot of these codexes still. They still have them. And I think what they did is they said, okay, it's the same questions I asked, really. They were like, there has to be a common root, because we see that all of these languages have the Germanic languages. So Germanic languages, by the way, the Scandinavian languages are all Germanic languages. German is obviously a German language. Anglo-Saxon is, Frisian, Icelandic, obviously, which is Old Norse, which would be another one. So, and there are other related languages, but they looked at all of these and they went, okay, what do these languages all have in common? What words do they have in common? What sounds do they have in common? And they started compiling the commonality. And out of the commonality, they started to realize, these actually seem to add up to words that are different descriptions of the same thing, but clearly earlier and in amassing of all these, the confluence of all these different languages. And now they realize that those are connected to this other obscure language group from Central Asia, which was spread around by the horse tribes. So, and again, that's one of the reasons I got so excited about the runes in the first place.
Wow.
When I started digging into them, was that I went, wait a minute, the things that are being described in the runes are not Central Asian things. They are not Scandinavian things. They're not Central European things. They're not Scandinavian things. They're Central European things. The horse has its own rune. Think of the significance of that. It's so important in the culture that a central phonetic value related to animals in general
Everything comes from China, man. Everything comes from China.
Well, now here's what's interesting. This obsession with the East and with the sun.
Steppes of Russia.
There's a strange connection here, and that is that in Norse mythology and in Germanic mythology, guess what gender? Ooh, trigger word. Guess what gender the sun is?
Female.
What other Eastern Asian culture is the sun female?
Japan.
Japan.
Okay.
Who are the ancestors of the Japanese? They're actually made of two.
You got me, bro. Lemuria.
Okay. No. The Mongols. No, it's the Mongols. So what it is that
I don't know any pre-Japanese history. That's amazing.
I thought there was a samurai class of ancient warrior.
That was way later. That's like Edo period. Yeah. So basically, the basic. Okay. So you're going to get the quick composition of Japan. Quick composition of Japan. So the people of Okinawa and the islands of Japan, there was an original Aboriginal people there. They're called the Ainu. And that's why if you talk to Okinawans, if they say, "Oh, you're Japanese," they'll say, "Get the flip out of here," because we're not Japanese. We are our own ethnic group. Well, they're actually Ainu. And what happened is the Mongols are related to the Koreans. The ancient Koreans are actually related to the Mongol people. Now, don't tell the Koreans that because they get all bent out of shape if you point that out. But it is still the truth. There are a lot of things that are the truth that bend people out of shape, but I don't care. Anyway, so what happened is there was a group of Korean bandits that had boats. They had the ability to go on the Sea of Japan, and they would raid against the Korean settlements in the Korean coast. Well, those bandits started forming bases on the islands of Japan, and they slowly built colonies. So the truth is, the Japanese, the mainland ethnicity of the Japanese are actually the Koreans. They're actually Korean, but then they interbred over time with the Ainu that were already on the islands. And so that's why most Koreans can't grow facial hair, but some Japanese can, because the Ainu were the hairy ones. So they interbred, and that's why you get, the Japanese master with the mustache, right? That's because they're descended from those people. And if you were descended from those people, you were considered to be of a lower class than the purebred original invaders. By
the
them,
hairless one.
The hairless wonder. But anyway, but we do know this. There was a megalithic culture on the Korean peninsula that was very, very ancient. And I love this part. They opened up one of those tombs, and inside the tomb, painted on the wall, I'm not shitting you, was an 8-legged horse of fire.
Shut the fuck up. Oh my goodness.
And it's inside. It's inside of
Odin. Odin is Korean?
No. I think what you've actually got is that. Well, here's okay. Let me. I want to clarify.
Keep going.
I'm really not. I've become less convinced that all of these things have less to do with ethnicity and more to do with a culture that spread around, and that many ethnicities became part of that culture, which is why Genghis Khan had green eyes and red hair. We also know that, for example, they have found burial mounds, burial mounds in the steppes of Central Asia, but at the roots of the mountains of Western China. And when they dug those up, the bodies they pulled out were 6-foot-tall men with long red hair and wearing tartan. They would look in every way like a Viking Scotsman, taller than a Scotsman because they're all short. But the point is that they started finding these indications that these people that we associate so much with Europe probably migrated out of Central Asia over a period of time from Attila and the Huns, which, by the way, the Attila and the Huns, they were white-skinned, long black hair with piercing blue eyes. That was the description of Attila the Hun. So clearly that Caucasoid mutation was going on in Central Asia, because that's where we know it all came from. We also know that possibly even came before that, because, and may not even started there, because there are Sumerian figurines that are carved out of alabaster that have blue lapis lazuli, set in the eyes. So it's very possible that there were blue-eyed, blonde-haired, and black-haired Sumerians as well. So that's important, because going back to our conversation, Dan, about the antediluvian thing, where did those people come from?
Yeah, that's what I was like going
straight I
to
can tell you
some
that.
sort of Atlantean bloodlines.
Yeah, I can. Well, people
and
know
especially
where
if
that
you
goes,
consider,
but they weren't Sumerians, though. Those weren't Sumerians. Those were Anunnaki.
Well, but here's the question. We know that the people who originally were the Sumerians, who were called the Sumerians, according to their own mythology, came to Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, up the Persian Gulf in boats. We know this. This is documented in their mythology. And that's an antediluvian event, which suggests that whoever the Sumerians were, they were coming from somewhere else, because they got flooded out. And they were bringing whatever remnants of the culture they had with them. And they came across these people who lived in the marshes at the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And they were the Akkadians. And they were like, Reed Hut kind of people. And these people showed up. I would say probably a limited number in the boat showed up and went, by the way, we can turn all this if we drain the swamps. And we'll big ziggurats, and we'll create medicine and systems of law. Because probably those things already existed that they brought with them. Because one of the weird anomalies of Sumeria is that based on what we've been able to see up to now, we went from people who were like extremely primitive to overnight people with completely formed codes of law and medicine and science and astronomy. And that just doesn't work that way. So chances are they brought it with them, and then it just took some time. Where does the Box saga fall into this? Well, that's your department, Dan. But anyway, the point, my fundamental point is that it's entirely possible that the reason that the rising sun is a female in Japan, is a feminine figure in Japan, and it's a feminine figure in Germany, right, in Germanic culture. Well, what does that tell you? Clearly, there's some kind of connection between them, and we already know that connection probably are the Yamaya, the horse tribes of Central Asia that were moving culture around. And if you think about Central Asia and the steppes of Central Asia, it makes sense in a northern realm where the winters are brutal beyond any concept of brutal outside of Antarctica that we can think about. Just ask the German soldiers how cold it is there. Well, it's hard to ask them because they're dead. But anyway, but the point is that the sun in the spring that broke the winter, that's the mother, that's the giver of life. Because if they already had a rune for what? They already had a rune for the sky. They already had a rune for the All Father, for the sky king. So that's not the sun, that's the sky. The sun is the bringer of life. And in most northern cultures, what brought life? Woman, man, woman. It was she birthed. So my feeling is that what we're really talking about in Norse mythology, what we're really talking about in runes, and probably other structures, and we're talking about some kind of primordial culture that was probably animistic and shamanistic that developed in Central Asia in the context of this horse tribe civilization that was there. And I think that the runes, and my whole thing about the runes is that they are actually one of the documents of that lost culture. I'm just going to say it. I think they are one of the artifacts of that lost culture, and they quite possibly are related to people that escaped Samaria when Samaria was overrun by Sargon and the Akkadian armies that destroyed Samaria from Samaria, and then, you know, gave rise to Babylon 1 and then Babylon 2. But the point is that, go ahead.
Do you think it's puzzle? Do you think it's pieces to build some lost technology, potentially, like some blueprint or plans or something where we could like maybe build some sort of fucking starship?
I don't. Okay. The simple answer is yes. Because everything that I've got says that. Everything says that it is a transportation device of some kind, because it's a horse, right? It's a horse, and it's not a four-legged horse. It's an eight-legged horse. What's the eight-legged horse? That is this structure. But I think
so if you take 8 of the runes from the horse runes instead, put them together, what does that look like? What does a horse rune look like? I gotta look this up.
I wish I could.
Could it be a boat? Could it be a boat with 8 oars?
I think it's not conveyance in any way that we think of conveyance. I think it's conveyance in the concept of portal.
Oh wait, is it an M? Is it? It
yeah,
looks like an
it
M.
looks like an M.
Holy shit!
But it really isn't an M. It really isn't an M. I think so. My first theory was, when I saw that rune, as I said, it looks an awful lot like a step saddle. So it looks like this kind of saddles that they put on horses in Central Asia, and you see it, even the Paiutes and other brought that technology, that idea with them. It's that they got a high front and a high back and a slooped back, and you sit basically stuck between. It's not like a Western saddle or an English saddle. Oh, something just happened.
I'm scrolling.
Yeah. So, and the conclusion that I came to is that either represents the foreleg and back leg of a horse and the slope of its back, or it represents the saddle.
It's the unicorn horn catching.
I love it. I love it. You guys are like, you're like a pit bull, man. You just grab your teeth out of that and you run. I love it. But yeah.
I want to answer that bot question though.
Yeah, please do. No, I'll shut up. I see the floor.
So somebody asked, how does the Bach Saga fit into this? So, the Bach Saga says that people escaped Udenma, which was in like Helsinki, and they escaped in a boat, and they went into they went to Gotland. Then they left Gotland and went to Europe. They became like the Gauls. So they left Gotland, or Goodland, the Goatland, and they went into Europe. Yeah. Then later on, thousands of years later, because these are basically the survivors of like the Younger Dryas time period, and they were trying to rebuild. Way later, the tribe, the Dan and Sven, who are brothers, they split, which was the Vikings. So the V in the Vikings is like the split of the kings. So one was Dan, and he was blonde and blue-eyed, and Sven was red-haired and green-eyed. And Dan, that tribe sailed down into the Mediterranean and into the Black Sea, or they went down some of the rivers and like the Don into the Black Sea from Europe, and they started to set up shop in what was called Hindustan, which was that Middle Eastern area. And from there, they kind of spread out into different areas. So these were the Caucasians, but they started to mix with these other different populations around the area, forming different ethnic groups, and the Tartars were one of them. So that's how you get the different Caucasian or Caucasoids coming down from there, which would tie into why maybe they had all these concepts or ideas already kind of more or less understood before they got to these other lands. And so then you get into the other stuff. But I just wanted to relate that topic.
Well, I know, because someone asked about it, so I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
You are far
And
more
then
knowledgeable about
and
how
the
they come
Dan,
in.
and then Dan, that kind of goes into a lot of Tribe of Dan stuff, and then it goes into that's why I asked about the Duat, because the Duat and Tuat is basically the same, and the Tuatha De Danann is the people from the Duat. So it's the people from Egypt, like the Sudan, which was like Lower Egypt, where there's lots of pyramids and shit. Dog-headed men. This ties into all that type of ideas too. So the Osiris, the Dogon, the Dawn, the cult of the Dawn, the Order of the Dawn. It's all the same shit. So I think that like the Dawn, the Dan tribe, or probably the tribe that went to like a lot of the western areas, but maybe Sven, because of the red hair, was the one that ended up going into the east because they went towards like Ireland and Scotland, and then maybe they kept going east and then ended up in Japan and stuff, or west.
It's an interesting. Well, it's an. I just want to. If I can, I interrupt. I just want to interject something, and that is what
Yeah,
is
yeah,
interesting.
I'm done.
This is straight. This is straight. I'll say mainstream academic thought. But one of the things, the word Celt actually comes from the word Keltoi, and the Keltoi. Well, no, different word. Celt is what the Greeks called the people that were migrating from Central Asia through Greece into Western Europe, and that's a Greek word, Keltoi. And we also know this: a Celt is also a farming implement. It sort of looks like an adze. It's got a long wooden handle on it and kind of like a shovel end, so it sort of looks like this, right? And it's a farming implement.
Yeah.
It's also called
like a hoe.
So it's a hoe. It's a hoe that you herd your female dogs with. Anyway, but the point is that it's entirely possible that the reason that the Greeks calling these people Celts, that there was no specific Celtic group, because they were calling all these people that were coming through from Central Asia Celts. They may have been of different tribes and different ethnic groups and not even necessarily connected to each other, is just the point, right? Tuatha de Donald Trump.
Tuatha de Don. Donald.
So that was
Hilarious.
one point.
Well, because like a Don is like a higher up too. Yeah.
No,
well,
dude, that was satirical, strictly satirical.
It was strictly satirical.
Did you
that
freeze?
Should be I did.
Oh, there we go. No, you're good.
No, you're freezing, Ben.
I'm gonna do it again. Because of course you have to freeze like this, apparently. But this is that's a good freeze. We should all we do really like.
We'll post.
So anyway, this is an interesting note, and this is a very not a lot of people know about this. So there was an event that happened in South Central Africa, and there was a noted time. There was literally a known time when it was a comet, I think, that exploded in the atmosphere that people witnessed. This is something that people saw. And after this explosion happened, the next year, all the lions that were born in the next year all had white fur and blue eyes. And there's now a subspecies
because it blocked out the sun.
Lion. I don't know. It's like it changed the genetics of a certain group of lions that were nearby the event, and it changed them in such a way, apparently, that now all of these lions are born with white fur and blue eyes. It's a very small group, but it does raise this question of what happened, maybe even during the Little Dryas. What happened in the northern hemisphere that may have done the same thing to humans, right? Where maybe there was some event, some celestial event. There's an interesting argument that I've heard, because just to be clear, I don't tippy-toe around studying anything. I'll study anything. I don't care, and I don't care what anybody thinks about whether I do it or not. So just so you know, I have a lot of not caring about what people's opinions are about what I choose to explore. So I was very captivated and very curious about the swastika for a very long time. I remember the first time I ever saw it when I was a little child, I was immediately transfixed by it. And I've studied it at great length. And one question that comes up, because it is such a peculiar symbol, if you think about it, it's a very complex symbol. It's not like a circle. It's two crossed lines with things on the end. Sometimes it's represented with curves and curls and all kinds of things. And so I was very curious, just like with the runes, where did this symbol come from? How did this symbol, which is complex, well, it turns out that symbol is actually older than the cross. Did you know that? Mm-hmm. It turns out that the oldest, and you will appreciate this, the oldest one in the world was found carved on mammoth ivory in the Ukraine. And it is dated to at least 20,000 years old.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that is that if you go then to, I believe it's the Shang dynasty in China, you know, the Chinese were always really good at keeping very elaborate records from the time, basically, as soon as they had paper and ink, they started writing things down, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there is a clay tablet from the Shang dynasty that's in the Imperial Archives that has a depiction on it of every comet that had been seen in the sky to that point, and there's one that had 4 tails. So it's entirely possible that the introduction of the swastika into the human paradigm was literally a celestial observation of a 4-tailed comet that everyone in the world would have seen. So there's an interesting thing there about celestial connection between things. But it's also interesting how the swastika relates to this, because if you look at the structure, you can draw either a swastika this way or this way on this grid. You can also do curved arm ones. It's all there. There's also an interesting note too. There's a place it's south of the Ural Mountains. It's right toward the end of the Ural Mountains, the southern end, and it's technically in Russia, I think. The site is called Arkham, not like the asylum, I promise. It's called Arkham, and they found in the middle of Central Asia. No explanation. They found a city that had exterior walls, interior walls, and then 4 big spokes, and it's basically a big swastika. The whole city is a big curved arm swastika right there at the southern end of the Urals. And they found things around, and it's ancient in antiquity. It's like I think it's close to like Göbekli Tepe, age-wise, right? You know that site, Göbekli Tepe?
Of course.
You know that site?
Yeah.
Which they now have dated to 11,000 years. 11,000. And they were carving stone and putting up big megalithic structures when we were supposedly living in caves. Give me a break. Get the flip out of here. That's why again, that's part of my antediluvian argument, is that everything that exists now is actually a refugee civilization that evolved after the flood, after the waters rose. So
can I stop you? Can I stop you right now?
Please. No, stop me.
And then, hey, Roman, you want to hit up people in the chat and see if anybody has any final questions? We got 20 minutes left. So if anybody has any final questions for Raven, post them up. That way we can answer those. Otherwise, carry on, Raven.
Well, and you know what? I just want to throw something out.
Sweet.
What?
I was just saying sweet because it was stopped and said that, and it was just like, let's go right exactly where we left off. Let's go.
Yeah, and go. I just want to throw it out there though, is that I'm very interested in all of these topics, and I don't really see them as divergent. I see them as connecting. And I don't think any topic is irrelevant. And I would love to encourage the people that are watching this and that watch us in the future, come at us with questions. I'd love to have topics that you'd love to hear us talk about. I think that would be really interesting. Or address topics that we could address. I think that'd be fun. I don't know about you guys, but it sounds fun to me. Wow, that was total crickets from you guys.
No, I mean, like, I'm always, dude. It's just gotta.
That's why you're here.
Hard, man. I endless hours of just needing to know what the fuck is going on within the realms of reality, you know. And it seems like it's for the rest of the days. It will always be eternal, even afterwards. The seeking of truth. So I'm on the mission, baby. Let's fucking go.
Yeah, let's do it. I love it. So that was enough of an interruption that I don't remember what I was talking about. So you have to tell me because I don't remember. I lost me trying to thought. I did. I'm sure all of us did. That's
it. One thing. Go ahead.
Sorry, my train of thought. Please, sir, I have another. Anyway, go
ahead. Shit. Well, I'm also fascinated with just the American or the just modern English alphabet. You know, it's written in such a way that it is significant. And looking at you know, the horse rune earlier, and it does resemble an M, what we would consider an M now, because in Greek it was a little bit askew, but the M, what I thought was interesting is the M in Greek alphabet is mu, and you have the horse rune, like you're saying, coming out of Central Asia, being shaped like an M, and it's the horse rune, and you got mu, you got this whole kind of Lemurian kind of crosshairs popping off around there. So, but we did tie into some Sumeria. But what is your take on the Lemurian race and that having roots over in Central Asia as well?
Well, the thing that's tricky a little bit about Lemuria and Atlantis, all of those topics, those civilization topics, is it's a little difficult to disambiguate exactly. Like Atlantis, we know because Atlantis, of course, comes through the two books that Plato wrote, Timaeus and Critias, right? That's the entire origin of that story is Plato's accounting, which supposedly Herodotus told him after Herodotus had been told it by a priest on the Nile in Egypt, right? Because Herodotus spent a bunch of time on the Nile. Well, and there are specific geographic formations that are mentioned, the Atlas Mountains and other things, are a reference to Atlas, right? And the Atlas, by inference, the Atlas Mountains. Which is why I have to admit that the Eye of the Sahara, as it's called, is a very compelling argument. There's a very compelling argument supporting that actually is the remnants of Atlantis that was being described by the priest to Herodotus, because it geologically it matches on so many levels, except for the fact that it's way up, it's like 1,300 feet above sea level. But apart from that, it really, it's got a salty and a hot and cold spring at the center of it, which is exactly what's described in Atlantis. It's got the rings, the whole thing. But anyway, my point is that, well, I'll tell you what my exposure to, where my information about Lemuria came from. There was, are you familiar with the Rosicrucians? The Order of the Rosy Cross, which was related
to
the Templars and the Masons, etc.
Absolutely.
So the account of Lemuria that I was first exposed to was from a Rosicrucian book on the subject. The tricky part is, where does the information about Lemuria come from? One source, Madame Helena Blavatsky, right? Theosophy. That's the theosophical, her root race idea. Which, by the way, isn't it amazing? I was just talking to someone about her today.
I love her root race idea and concepts of the seven. Yeah,
it's fantastic.
Yeah.
But the fact that this one, and at a time when women weren't as listened to, this one Russian woman goes to Tibet, climbs up into a monastery, goes into the basement of the monastery, hangs out, and supposedly meets these ascended beings who then tell her this story, which is the essence of the secret doctrine. It's basically what the secret doctrine was written from. And then they talked about the root races and you know, the excessive age of the earth, right? How old the earth is. And I'm not positive, but I think that Lemuria was mentioned during, like, Lemuria is part of theosophy. I think it's something that came to us via theosophy. There might be, and I could be wrong. I will be the first to admit that I could be wrong. But that's because the Rosicrucian stuff seems to be connected through some of those same ideas that came through theosophy. So, I mean, what are your Raman or Dan, either one? What are your thoughts on the origin of the Lemuria story? I'd love to hear.
I think Lemuria
just
is
talking
Atlantis Part 2.
It was both of you talking at the same time. Okay. Dan was talking first, so Dan, go first, then Roman.
I think Lemuria was like Atlantis Part 2, and it was a breakaway civilization from the Atlantean civilization, and that's why they share a lot of the same ideas and culture. And then that, when the flood happened, Lemuria sank and Atlantis sank at the same time, and the Lemurians were in the Pacific area, or maybe even Antarctica, and went into the northern area, which was like China and stuff like that. And then the Atlanteans came down from the north, and then they ended up meeting for the big battle that you get in the Mahabharata.
Interesting.
So I think they're part of the same original culture, but it was like a breakaway. And then I think it breaks away even further from there into other different Atlantis Part 2 and Part 3, and then that's where you get Tartaria and stuff.
Yeah, I can kind of dig that too. Yeah, I think Lemuria itself was more of like a culture that was just intuitively and, you know, slightly speculatively what I feel about it is that it was probably more of like a watery based, you know, spiritual culture that just wanted to I don't know, like focus on its like people kind of situation. You know, maybe they understood more about like natural physics and magnetics and heightened consciousness and you know, and then I think they were probably, you know, existing at a time when the Earth's stasis was pretty chill, and they had some really nice environment and atmosphere for them to, you know, be able to build really amazing, huge. Because I think like a lot of the Vedas, like, you know, is good depictions of what like remnants of a Lemurian kind of. I feel like the Vedas are the tail end of a Lemurian culture.
Interesting.
You know, like
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I mean that's really it. Like I think there's something more to that, you know, and the bells, man. Like I'm big on the bells right now, and just understanding frequencies and harmonies and sound and the you know, because looking at all of these ancient structures, and they were all built for a specific acoustic purpose, you know, to reverberate in a certain way. And so I think looking at the history of sound and trying to understand how like these things could have been activated, you know, I think the earth has been detuned, and I think that's kind of one of the spiritual wars that we're battling right now, is like the detunement of like a proper vibrating earth to like access these types of like concepts like portals and shit, you know. And yeah, so I think just there's a time when there was a harmonious type of culture, and they were just here for the major ascension of spirit and this like complete community as a whole. And that's what I would hope what Lemuria was, and that's what it is in my sweet sweet speculative transpired thoughts there.
What do you think of the discovery that they've made now that they realize that the islands of New Zealand were in fact actually the high points in what is now a submerged continent? They've realized now that there's actually a continent. The big problem with the Pacific has always been that the Pacific is just abyssally deep. Like they're other than places like Hawaii, volcanic islands where there are some that stick up above the surface. Except for that area, which is that what we know was a raised landmass that connected basically Indonesia to Australia, but also now we know there was a separate continent that connected the two islands of New Zealand, and it was there. Those were shallow.
The Aleutian chain.
Zealandia.
The Aleutian chain.
Aleutian is too far north. I'm talking down here by between South Asia, like Southeast Asia and Australia, which they know that's how the Aborigines got there, was that they followed a land bridge across from basically Indonesia.
Micronesia? Yeah, the Micronesian islands and everything.
Right. They weren't an island. They were actually yes. And I've heard the argument that says now that they think there was a landmass that connected Madagascar into South India. And that there, across the Indian Ocean, there was a submerged landmass. But
when we talked to Van Galt, she said like the area of the Philippines was all above water, but when the flood happened, it pretty much covered everything there, and that's why you have all those little islands right there for the Philippines. But when the water was lower, there was a big landmass there, and so that's potentially part of what Lemuria was, and they went into the next biggest continent, which was that China area, or maybe even that's where all the people of India came from, and they all migrated in there from the flood or whatever. Who really knows? But I do want to say to the people listening that we are going to be doing this show once a month with Hraefn, and Hraefn is endless topics. We can go into fucking anything. We can go into history.
We can go into the origins of witchcraft. We can go into Aleister Crowley. We can go into Egypt. We can go into India. We can go anywhere you want to go.
Fuck yeah.
There we go.
Especially if we have things
Chaco
to look forward to. Oh, dude. Okay, my buddy today called me and told me he was in Chaco Canyon yesterday.
Awesome. I love Chaco Canyon.
I've never been there. He just bought property down in New Mexico like 3 weeks ago, and this guy is a bushcraft guy, so he tans hides, makes arrowheads, like he flint naps, and he go to his house and all he has is sticks and rocks, like thousands of pounds. He's a rock hounder. But so he was telling me, he's like, dude, because I'm going down there after this harvest season. I'm like, bro, I'm gonna go spend some time with you in New Mexico, brother. And he's just like, that he went to Chaco Canyon today. I was like, what the fuck, Chaco Canyon? I've heard so much about it, bro. He's like, he said he found dinosaur bones and huge fossilized turtle shells down there. And I was like,
there's all kinds of stuff there. Can I just throw out, what would be fun? I'm just going to throw it out there into the ethers. How fun would it be for the three of us to meet in Chaco Canyon and do a show from there?
Let's do it.
Fuck
down.
Hey, let's do it.
That would be awesome.
You don't have to tell me twice.
It's fairly close to me.
I thought you were up north somewhere.
Don't threaten me with a good time.
I'm in Salt Lake City, but that's still not far from the Four Corners area. And
I was thinking you were somewhere like north for some reason.
Well, that's where I grew up, was north. But I've lived in Salt Lake City for 15 years, if you can believe that. Wow. I live 6 blocks from the temple.
High vibes out there in Utah. There's a reason all that, it gets all that shit. There's a reason why these areas are, they're desolate, man, is because they're insanely high vibes going on.
Is this going to I'm just curious, is this just going to shut off at 2 hours?
No.
Okay. I just was wondering, because I noticed we're coming right up on that.
Insane.
So I was just going to, really quickly, I want to tie all this back around to the beginning of the conversation just for a second. And the thing is, if you look at this structure and you think about everything we've talked about, where Midgard exists because the elements of the world were, or the elements that existed were arranged in such a way to create the hologram of Middle Earth in the middle of it all. See, I think a lot of this is about it. It's kind of like a portal / hologram projector. That everything we're experiencing, the Middle Earth, as actually our Earth, flat, hollow, whatever you want to call it. But what I'm saying is the Middle Earth is the projection at the center of this. This is the nexus. And it really is affected by how our understanding of it and how we relate to it. I want to make one point about Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil supposedly has 3 springs, or 3 pools, 3 springs, and 3 roots. Now, what's interesting about that is that I question that highly. I think there's 1, but what you experience depends on what you understand. Oof. So it's 3 different realms based on what your vibration is, right?
So it's an initiatory process.
Sounds very
Odin
occult.
Odin hangs over the root that goes into Jotunheim, and this is really significant. The pool that is Mimir's pool, which is under that root that he hangs over, is what's left of Ginnungagap, which was the original place where Ymir and Althuma, the great cow, lived. And then that pool was, now there's Midgard, which has now become the center made out of Ymir's body. So what's interesting is that Jotunheim, which is where Ginnungagap was, which is where the great cow was, which is where Ymir was, which is the frost giants, wasn't created. It was always there. All that happened is the Asgardians conquered
transcended
the Titans, the Jotuns. You notice it's almost the same word, Titan and Jotun. Mm-hmm. And the Jotun and the Titans are actually very similar when you start to compare their names. But anyway, the point is that you have 1 route that goes into Niflheim, the land of ice, and it goes over like a hot spring pool. Like the pool there is a gurgling, hot spring. Then you have the pool of Mimir at the root in Jotunheim, and then you have some inconceivably difficult Icelandic name to pronounce. The pool that is at the root that goes into Asgard. So it's Asgard, and if you look at this, it's Asgard, Jotunheim, and Niflheim. Now, what's interesting about that is that when you put that in the structure, it creates that rune. Nifl.
1, 2, 3.
It's Niflheim, the land of ice, Jotunheim, the land of the giants, and Asgard, the land of the Aesir. And that rune, in my understanding, actually represents the equinox, specifically the spring equinox, the vernal equinox, which in the ancient world, in Chaco Canyon, in Japan, in India, in where's the other big? The Sphinx. All of them. The orientation of the pyramid, where you can see the 8 sides. That's all the spring equinox. It's that the spring equinox was the thing in the ancient world. So many things are aligned with that. And I don't know if you know this, but every building has been surveyed, and every building in Chaco Canyon, every structure in Chaco Canyon lines up in one way or another with the vernal equinox.
Reminds me of Neptune's trident.
Well, there's that element too. A little side note that it was a big epiphany I had about one of the runes that I wanted to share with you, and it's still a developing epiphany. Chicken wing. Sorry. Every time I scroll Instagram, the people keep putting that stupid song over things, and it starts to get burned into your brain if you watch reels. But anyway, what was interesting is I've been fascinated by. I would say that the R rune, Rado, which is the 4th. No, it's the 5th. It's the 5th rune in the beginning of the strand, and it's Rado, and it means 2 things. It means to ride, and it also means the sound of many horses riding. And I think it's interesting that, again, another horse reference so prominent in the runes, again, drives us to that Central Asian horse culture kind of idea. But there's something else about that rune. It's between the Os rune and the Kin or Khan rune, the Kanaz, which is the torch or fire. And it's interesting that it goes Asgard, Redu, and then, or Os, Redu, or Ansus, Redu, whichever one you want to use. Os, Redu, and then fire. And there's an interesting thing structurally when you relate it to the grid, because the R rune, according to the grid, that's the back arm, that's the lump, and then down here is a little hump over Muspelheim. Muspelheim is land of fire. And there is this connection between that rune and fire, because the next rune is fire, and it actually completes the circle. So the R goes like this, and then that other rune goes like this around, and it fits around Midgard. It's even rendered most of the time as being small, which means it is referencing, I think, this smaller circle. But the point is, I started thinking about that rune, and I went, well, there's an interesting connection. One is that there is this weird almost idea that it represents lightning hitting a tree or lightning coming down the tree, which would be very consistent with several mythologies. The Pacific Northwest Coast mythology of ravens stealing the fire from his uncle to bring fire to the story of the Norwegian sailor Olaf Jansen and his account of sailing into Antarctica. That's actually, you're going to think this is weird, but that's actually new information to me. And I'm going to look into that because that's fascinating. That's very fascinating for a wide range of reasons. I will address that in the future. But the thing is that I was thinking about that rune, and I was thinking about what the name means. And the fact that it means to ride, like ride the lightning, right? These are phrases. Ride like the wind, ride the lightning. It's almost like it's suggesting a communion. That when you're on a horse and you're riding a horse at a gallop, because of the rhythm and the time and all that, but also the wind in your hair. Think of that in the open steppe of Central Asia. It'd be like flying. It'd be like it's the closest thing that we can think of. What are the comparisons? Driving a car really fast. It's almost a liberating or ascendant sort of expression. But it's also the sound of many horses.
Riding an iron horse.
Iron horse, which of course is the railroad, which is interesting that translates forward, right? So what I started to think about is I went, there is this interesting, since we know that Tiwaz, Tu, is the Sky Father, and that is probably the origin of Tyr and also actually Odin as characters, that these are later characters that were put in place to replace this primordial Central Asian sky deity, okay, which we also see translated in Zeus. And what did Zeus do? He threw lightning bolts, right? That was something that Zeus did. We also know that even when you go to the Ark of the Covenant and the power of God and Deus and all those things, right? Yes, excellent. Thunder beings, exactly. Crazy horse. Good point. I like that. So my point is, it made me start thinking about Poseidon. Now, Poseidon is the Greek originator of Neptune. Neptune came later. Neptune was the Roman interpretation.
Ties into
of the Greek
Atlantean worship too. He was the god of Atlantis.
Well, right. Well, he was the god of Atlantis, and a lot of people don't know this. When you think of Poseidon, you think what? He was the god of the sea, right? Mm-hmm. He's a sea god. Guess what? What else he is? He's also the god of horses and the god of earthquakes. Mm-hmm. So watch this build. We know that the most prominent we know the most prominent recurring deity in central what we'll call Anatolia, Middle East, that area, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the southern what am I thinking of? Bulgaria, the Thrace, that used to be Thrace, right? So that area, everybody adopted the storm god. The storm god was one of the most prominent gods cross-culturally. It had different names, was worshipped differently. You have Ahura Mazda, right? You have that whole Zoroastrian thing about fire, and there's this whole connection between these things. But the one thing that's really interesting is that I suspect highly that Thor was not originally a Norse deity. I think Thor was an adopted deity. I think that Thor is a transliteration from Thrace of this lightning thunderstorm god, which, by the way, is Enlil. Enlil, that's exactly what Enlil was a storm god. So what represented storms and those kind of things. So what the thing is, the other weird connection, and I thought this was really strange. You ever see the original Fantasia, Disney's Fantasia, that animated thing? No? Yes? No? So when they did the whole part where it's all the bacchanal, right? So it's Bacchus and the little donkey, and they're drinking and everything, and then Zeus is up there, and then Vulcan is forming lightning bolts and throwing them to Zeus, and Zeus is throwing them at Bacchus as he's running around, right? So I thought about that, and I went, the one thing we're forgetting here, and this is why it's so important to strip that Norse myth veneer off of this and look at it for what it's actually saying, not tied into the romance of that particular mythos. And what's interesting is that in the ancient world, one of the greatest powers, magicians of the highest order, were those that could work metal. The working of metal was one of the most powerful magical things. They literally revered the smith, right? The smith.
Vulcan is a very high up, like, worship god. Absolute. That's why I say the volcanoes, man, like, volcano worship goes back, and it's like those are the homes of the alchemist wet dream. It's like it's the
exactly.
It's so beautiful.
So the thing that I want to tie in here is just look at this. Volcanoes, earthquakes, the thundering of a hammer on the forge, the sound of many horses riding, the worship of earthquake in the form of Poseidon being the patron deity of earthquakes. So what this tells me is, and we know that whole area of the world is really prone to earthquakes. When they had these massive earthquakes in Turkey that fucking kill 70,000 people. We know Vesuvius, right? That's Pompeii and Herculaneum. I mean, it's a very seismically active area. We know that there are islands in the Mediterranean that literally exploded and sank, that had people on them. They found, in the bottom of the Mediterranean, remnants of civilization that clearly got blown apart by volcanism. So the thought that I had was, what if that R rune, what it's really talking about is not so much... That's an interesting... I'm going to keep my hand off of that for the moment. The little comments that popped up. I'm going to go over here and put my hand over here. I'm willing to talk about that later, but not now. But the point is that I'm making is that what if what we're really talking about is that R rune represents a primordial, almost trickster creation god. It's some deity, some deity that we don't even know anymore, that was from Central Asia, that combined that riding of the horses and the magic. In other words, it's the magic of civilization. It's the horses, it's the tack, it's the thunder,
spark of thought.
The spark of thought. It's the capturing of fire. It's the understanding of how to not only just capture fire, but to create fire.
High science.
Exactly.
Technology creation.
I'm saying about the runes is that the runes, I think, are actually a document of an ancient system of knowledge, and they were a symbol system that was used to connect a simple meaning and a simple phonetic with a certain body of knowledge. And if you understood that rune and understood the riddle of that rune, it told you. So if you had it memorized, like the old bardic memory, right? The long memories, the people that could memorize 10,000 stanza. The Iliad is like a 10,000 stanza poem that people memorized. And it had to do with the meter of it and different things. But
That's
what
where
if you
the
had
mnemonics comes into play of the old architecture, man. Why they used to live life in a completely different
exactly,
realm because they worshipped
exactly.
memory.
Well, because memory was what it was all about. And here's the thing. There's a rune, and I just want to bring this up. There's a rune. It's the first rune. It's called Fehu. And it's interesting that it's F-E-H, like horse, E-H, U. And then the next rune is U, which is Urasas, which is related to the Uruk, which it's interesting that that's the primordial cow. That's the great cow Al-Humla, and the next one is the giant Ymir. That's what I'm saying. I think that what the runes really were doing is they were created. I'm not going to say this as fact. I'm saying this is my hypothesis. I will say it's the question,
Opinion.
and that is
idea.
I'm going to state it as a question. Are the runes a system of symbols, imagery, and phonetics that were created to make it possible for people fleeing a dying civilization to memorize and help memorize as much information from that civilization as possible? In other words, you had people that had that bardic memory, that long memory, that then knew through their memory. Like, you know, they say the Sumerians, they came up the Persian Gulf in boats, and they came up bringing with them knowledge. Well, you're in boats. How are you going to carry what? Scrolls, tablets? We know that, you know, come on, how are you going to do it? They were people, they were the special people that had actually, almost like the Mentats in Dune, right? They were human computers that had this ability to memorize volumes of information.
And divination with the runes through that sense of like tapping in.
What'd you say?
I say fuck yeah.
Well, it's interesting because that first rune, supposedly, what the scholars associate it with is they say that it means paddle, and that it's the idea of mobile wealth. And I went, okay, but that's problematic because, first of all, these people had not domesticated the fucking cow. They domesticated the horse. They domesticated the goat. The cow came in from the Middle East. Later, it was domesticated in India. It was because, but not up north. In fact, you know what it would have taken to domesticate a fucking Uruk? You know how big those things were? These are the bulls that Hercules wrestled. Okay, they were gigantic, and they were a force. They were a force of nature that you didn't just go, oh, we're going to milk one because it would.
Maybe it was the mushroom that came out of the cow's shit.
Wow. Well, you know, I like that level of distraction.
I mean, hey, dude, if these are massive bowls, you know, there's specific fungi that only grow.
I've heard that before
of these animals. I mean,
that's interesting. Well, that would tie in because what I think that first rune, which is represented, see, okay, I'm going to do it backwards and see for you guys. That's this.
It's not a paddle, it's a mushroom.
Like it goes like this, and it's got two arms on it like this. They go up at an angle. That's the way the traditional rune. So it goes like that. And what's interesting about that, though, is I looked at that, and when I ran it through this filter, I said, well, remember, wood grain. You can't do horizontal lines. You have to do lines at an angle so you can see them, right? So let's just hypothetically straighten those out. So if you put the long line here, and you put the two lines coming from Midgard to Asgard, what have you done? You've just connected the celestial land, the sky land to the earth land. And because that's the first rune, I think with that rune in mobile wealth, it's the knowledge. I think the first rune actually represents the knowledge of the culture, your knowledge the knowledge of your civilization. Like it's because that's what makes a civilization. People go, oh, civilization is buildings and roads. No. Civilization is the ability to fucking build buildings and roads. That's what civilization is. Civilization is the understanding of how to tame your environment, how to change things to make it so that you can produce food. It's the knowledge. And if you think about it,
so Prometheus.
Go ahead. Yeah. Well, see,
Prometheus didn't just steal fire; he stole technology.
He stole technology, and what else did he do? And why did he do it? That's the important part. Why did Hraefn steal the fire from his uncle? Why did Prometheus do it? Because humans needed it. It was all about bringing light and warmth to the world of humans. It was the illumination of Midgard. Essentially, it was that gift of because fire. Many people, they used to say that fire was like the first great innovation, like the capturing and making of fire was the first great innovation. Now they're saying that literally spoken language was probably the first real innovation, because our ability to speak and articulate like we can is very unique to our species. At least to the degree, the fact that we have this articulation between our lips, our tongues, our mouths, our larynx, all of those things together is a pretty bizarre adaptation when you think about it, compared to most other even closely related critters to us, right? But my point is that, yes, Prometheus, and I thought a lot in the same context about this same rune, we're talking about the gift of civilization, the gift of knowledge, the gift of survival. So maybe what that rune is it's a recognition. The Rado rune is actually a recognition, a memory, a reverence, if you will, to the taming of the knowledge to tame the natural world, to capture the natural world and make it possible for humanity to even continue to exist outside of, scavenging and basically moving in this new direction. So the direction that became civilization. So it's possible that that was really confusing me, Dad. I just have to say, earlier on, I was like going, why does his microphone keep appearing and disappearing in this living room? And then he disappeared. And then it was like, oh, he's projecting background.
Wait, was the living room was fake?
Yeah,
earlier?
I think so.
Or was that a real
I live in a brick shit house.
Well, I kind of wondered, because it had a grand piano in the background of it, and it didn't really seem like you live in a grand piano kind of household. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Just a feeling.
No, I don't.
My point is that I think that rune may be the rune of the primal trickster deity, the primal creator trickster. In other words, Loki, Poseidon, Hraefn, all of them are actually talking about the same entity, and that entity is as old as the giants, it's as old as the gods, it's as old as it's older, actually. That's Loki is the one figure in Norse mythology that has no origin myth, that has no beginning. Loki just was, always has been. They can't even kill him. When they punish him for eternity, what do? They tie him to a tree. It's interesting that the punishment of Loki and the punishment of Poseidon are very similar. Tied to a tree where a serpent drips poison into his face or into his eyes or something, and then an eagle rips out his liver and eats his liver for eternity, which regenerates, which tells me that he just was really high and got drunk a lot, and so he was an alcoholic and stoned. Forever. Perma high.
Forever.
But my point is that I really am working now to relieve myself of all my preconceptions about even the Norse stories being Norse stories, and maybe not even being Norse stories. Maybe they are stories that came and that were adopted or expanded or invigorated. And the reason we're seeing Titans and Jotuns and we're seeing these parallels is because neither the Greek version nor the Norse version nor any of these versions are the original version. They all came from some kind of, wow, I just realized what I was doing.
Walk saga.
But they came from some primordial source that possibly is entirely lost to us at this point, other than how it is preserved as echoes in related cultures. I'll say periphery cultures or secondary cultures. So anyway, that's the basis of why I do what I do, other than the fact that apparently beings show up sometimes and go, "Hey, dummy." They go, "Hey, dummy." And I go, "Okay." You know.
Yeah, we should talk about some X points and other abduction stories or interaction stories, better yet, call them. And some like energy stuff next time. And yeah, I'm excited, man. This is great. We could do this every month and just fucking dive deep into the realms of the known and the unknown and everything in between. I'm super down. This has been great.
And I want to throw out to the person that put up that thing. I am going to look into Olaf and the potential journey to Antarctica. That's very intriguing to me for a lot of reasons. So thank you for bringing that up.
Ooh, yes, Antarctica Mysteries. Let's do it.
Excellent.
Oh, you mean the Great Ice Wall? I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I love because we have. I was actually I was talking to this. I have this wonderful.
That's a no word.
What is? Ice wall.
Ice wall.
No,
Dan.
Go ahead. What? No, go.
He's got some internal feelings about the flat Earth paradigm.
Well,
his tube socks get warm.
Well, here's the thing that's kind of interesting, and this was a conversation I literally had an hour before I came on here.
Nice.
So I have a very, very dear friend that lives in my building that she does deep dives into every conspiracy theory you could ever think of. And so we have a lot to talk about.
Nice, dude.
But one of the things that came up today is I said, it's like we have this need for there to be a singular truth. And I'm wondering, especially the more we explore this idea, the possibility that all of this is a simulation.
Yes.
Just that concept. Well, in a simulation, especially a generated simulation, what if there's not one true? What if there's many truths and that none of them are wrong? It's like different dimensions. That's a great way to kind of separate it. Say it's different timelines that are all happening at the same time, but they're all related to each other, just separated dimensionally. And so thinking about that, I went, there's something very liberating to your brain when you're not bound and determined to, there's going to be one thing, there's one truth. Yeah. I don't think there is. I think that a lot of this is based on what we think is true. In fact, what is this? The book is called The Smoky God. Oh, thank you. The Smoky God, A Voyage Journey into the Inner World. Oh, awesome. I love it even more.
Nice.
No, it's called The Smoky God. Okay, I'm going to check that out. But my point is that instead of fixating on, well, Atlantis was this, Lemuria was this, Lemuria did exist, Lemuria didn't exist. Instead of that, go, okay, this idea came from somewhere. It's in our consciousness as a species. In fact, a lot of these things are consciousness in our species. They're in our DNA. They're in our genetic memory, or whatever you want to call it, right? The great history of the walk of existence. These ideas are there, and they didn't come from nowhere. That's the thing. Like, clearly, if there's any idea out there about whether it's the Box Saga, whether it's Atlantis, whether it's, I don't know, flying monkeys flying out of, burning cars in Mesopotamia. I don't know. What I'm saying is that whatever those ideas are,
yes,
they're founded in something.
Yes.
And I think that's the thing, is like what we're looking for is the great flow. What is the great vibration that is inspiring all this? Where did it come from in our genome, in our consciousness? And so going just to the flat Earth thing for just a second, I'm not saying that it's round Earth or flat Earth. I'm saying, what if none of those are true? What if those are based on the perception of large bodies of humanity? Because there was a period of time clearly when many people in the world thought that the world was in fact flat, like flat, like it was just a plane that went on until it ran into oceans. In fact, Alexander the Great suspected that there might be more. That's part of the reason that he started the big quest, is he wanted to go east. He wanted to see what was there. But they believed at the time that the world only went so far, and they got to the borders of their maps and realized there was a whole fucking bunch more world there. So what I'm saying is that their experience changed because their perception and their ideas changed because their experience changed. So the question is, I'm not ready to just discount that everything that Admiral Byrd said, especially because of what happened to his son afterwards.
Oh, fuck yeah.
And the fact that he led Operation High Jump, I think it was High Jump, right? That was the one where they invaded Antarctica.
Operation High Jump, yeah.
And Admiral Byrd, with all clarity and seriousness, taken very seriously as an aviator, among other things, described in great detail flying into a hole inside the Earth and encountering a culture, a civilization, and animals and all kinds of things. Now, I'm not saying it's not possible for people to make shit up because, well, look at our current political world. But what I'm saying is that if you look into the descriptions, and he's not the only one that's talked about an entrance somewhere that you don't just encounter. It's like veiled in some way, but it's an entrance into an inner world. So does that say that
it's like what you're talking about earlier with the the duat in between the pyramids, right? Like the Vesca Pisces kind of concept that we were talking about earlier in the conversation. Like he was able to somehow, and Earth might go through these shifts, and I think that's the importance of like understanding astronomy and like looking at the zodiac and the celestial clock. Is like if Earth has special times in which the duat itself could open up,
portals open,
at certain times of the year due to certain celestial correspondences, then that's why we need to fucking pay the fuck attention to that. And because the people that run the world do, that's the only thing they fucking pay attention to any goddamn more. In fact,
I read a quote in the last week that this was literally a quote. It said, millionaires, what was the quote? It was actually from a famous person like J.P. Morgan or somebody. It said, millionaires
don't practice astrology. Billionaires do.
Billionaires follow the zodiac. That's what the line was.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very nice. I'll take that as a compliment.
We've mastered.
Whether it is or not, in my reality, I'm taking that as I'm kidding. But here's an interesting part, and this is a part of my experience that I've had with my visitors, and also what's coming up here, is that there is an important element. In fact, you know what? I would love to do a whole show just talking about one thing. The fucking moon. I would like to talk about the moon.
Oh, I really want to talk to you about the moon, dude. I really do want to talk to you about that.
The moon, the moon has so many strange anomalies about it. There are so many weird things about it. And I'll say this. The moon plays directly into Anasazi culture in a big way that I think is directly related to exactly what you were talking about, Roman. This rhythm, we'll call it, this rhythm of moving between the two realms. Because the moon has a wobble in its orbit. That wobble takes...
Kaylee and I, we're gonna start a specific moon show. Like we were just talking about starting a completely new show.
I can talk all about the fucking moon.
Getting people on to talk about the mysteries of the moon, like we were talking about that earlier today.
I mean, think about this. The moon has this cycle, this 18.63 year cycle, where it has a wobble in its plane orbit. The Anasazi tracked that. It's tracked in the Sundagger calendar on top of Fajada Butte in Chaco Canyon. It is actually documented to a degree in the structures of the buildings in Chaco Canyon. And remember, the people who are the descendants of the Anasazi, the Chacoans, are the Pueblo people, mainly the Hopi, not the Navajo, not the Dene, the Hopi. And what's interesting about that is when we were getting ready to do the moonshot, whether you believe it happened or not, we're just going to predicate on the fact that it was happening. A Hopi elder went to Washington, D.C. to tell them, do not bring anything back from the moon. There's something about the moon. Go ahead.
Let's stop right there. And
yeah, okay.
Let's get into the moon and Chaco Canyon and all that.
Yeah.
Let's save that for next time.
I think that you should advertise that show by doing a picture of. Well, the picture should just be a bare ass. That should be the advertising for that show.
With a bunch of tattoos of the runes.
Oh.
No. Red paddle marks of the runes.
Yes. Yes.
They're swinging in a completely different weird way. Well, can I just say, I want to say thank you to all the people that joined in and paid attention and listened to the show. I hope that some of my people were there. I don't know because I can't see anything other than what we're looking at. But I also hope that people got something good out of it. And I just want to say just my gratitude. I really appreciate that there's an audience there that wants to hear what we have to say and hear what we have to talk about. And I'm grateful for that. So I'm grateful to you guys for making it possible for me to come and talk. So
yeah. As we go on, more and more people will start to congregate and join with us too. So to talk. So especially once we start getting it situated to where we can pre-plan ahead. Because this was our first one, so we're trying to figure out how to do it ourselves. So now that we know, and Roman's got everything set up over there, we can keep doing these monthly, and we'll have questions ready to go too, and people can bring questions in. And now that we can set a topic for next time, see, look at all the comments coming in right now. People are ready for it. So next time, we'll get into the moon and we'll get into Chaco Canyon, because I think those would be awesome topics to get into. And like I've told everybody before, Raven has so many different aspects that he can go deep on. That's why we brought him in to do this show monthly with us, just because we love talking to him so much. He can talk forever, you see that, and he's filled with knowledge, and he has so many cool, fun stories that it's great, man. So I like how you dissect history. I like how you put things together, and like Slick Dissident said, you're a master weaver, man. So we appreciate that around here. Slick Dissident, Gabe is a friend of ours, also of the show, and so we often have done shows with him. And he likes to weave all that beautiful magic in there too. So maybe we'll have him pop in sometime and talk with us.
In a month, this will be done, and you can see what the finished painting looks like.
Oh, nice.
Excellent, man.
All right, guys.
Beautiful.
Well, thank you.
So thank you, Fire Tribe, for listening. And wake the fuck up.
Love it. All right, you guys. Have a good night.